I spent 2 months thinking our commander was a mistake the army had made. And on the day I found out I was the mistake, she had already saved my life twice without my noticing either time. I want to start there with my own wrongness, because everyone who tells this story makes it about her, and it should be about her, but you can't understand what she did unless you first understand how completely we failed to see it coming, and I was the worst of us. I was the loudest doubter. So if you want the truth of what happened on Keth, you should hear it from the one who got her most wrong, because I've had a long time to learn exactly how wrong I was, and there's no one left who can tell you that part but me. Let me set it down properly. My people are the Sorvan. We are an old military culture, older than humanity's by a long way, and we have, I'll admit it plainly, a great deal of pride about it. We had been making war among the stars for 2,000 years before the first human ever left their cradle world, and we had opinions about how it should be done, and chief among those opinions was a thing about command. Among the Sorvan, command is earned in a particular visible way. A commander is the strongest, the most proven, the one who has stood at the front of the worst fighting and survived it, and you can read a Sorvan commander's authority off their body and their bearing and the long list of battles behind them. Command, to us, is a thing you can see. It announces itself. That is the whole point of it. Soldiers follow what they can see is worth following. So you can imagine. When the Joint Command, this was during the Alliance, the years when my people and yours fought together against the Hadron incursion, an uneasy partnership of two military cultures that did not understand each other at all. When the Joint Command assigned a human officer to take over our mixed unit on Keth, and that human officer turned out to be a young woman, small, quiet, unremarkable, with none of the bearing a Sorvan reads as command, none of the visible proof, none of the announcement. We did not take it well. I did not take it well. I was a junior officer myself, Sorvan, proud, and I looked at the human girl they'd put over us and I thought, this is a political appointment. This is the Alliance making a gesture. They have given us a figurehead, a token, a soft human child in a uniform, and they expect us to follow her because the paperwork says so, and the paperwork does not know what command is. Her name was Captain Imni Vale. We called her among ourselves in our own tongue, a word that meant roughly the placeholder. I'm ashamed of it now. We used it for 2 months. I'll tell you about the day she arrived, because the day she arrived is the day I decided who she was, and being wrong about a person from the first hour is its own particular kind of poison. Once you've decided, every new thing they do just feeds the decision. She came up to the shoulder on a supply transport, no escort, no ceremony, carrying her own kit, and the first sight any of us had of our new commander was a small human woman climbing down off a cargo ramp with a bag over her shoulder, looking around at the gray rock, and the gun emplacements with an expression I read as overwhelmed, and now understand was simply taking it in. The unit had assembled to receive her, because that much protocol we'd grant even a placeholder, and there we stood, 300 soldiers, most of us Sorvan, big and proud and battle-scarred, drawn up in ranks to look our new human captain over. And I remember the silence. I remember how she walked down the front of that assembly, small among us, having to look up at most of the Sorvan, and I remember the contempt coming off the ranks like heat off rock. And I remember thinking she would do the thing, make the speech, assert the authority, perform the command, the way a Sorvan officer would have loudly to push back against 300 soldiers worth of doubt. She didn't make a speech. She walked the length of the assembly slowly, looking at us, really looking face by face, the way I'd later understand she did everything, and then she stopped at the center and she said one thing, just one. She said, "I know you didn't ask for me. I know what you'd rather have. I'm not going to tell you I've earned this because I haven't, not with you, not yet. So I'm not going to ask you to follow me. I'm going to ask you to let me learn you first, and then we'll see." And that was all. She dismissed us. No speech, no assertion, no performance of command, just I haven't earned you yet, let me learn you first. And I stood in the ranks and I thought, with a contempt I can still taste, there it is. She's already surrendered. She knows she can't command us, so she's not even going to try. The placeholder. I had it exactly backwards, and it would take me 2 months and a battlefield to see it. She hadn't surrendered command. She told us the truest thing about command that anyone had ever said to me, and I'd been too proud to hear it. I haven't earned you yet. A Sorvan commander believes the rank earns the soldiers. Vale believed the soldiers had to be earned, one at a time, by the commander. And she'd said so, out loud on the first day, to 300 people who despised her. And not one of us understood that we'd just been told exactly who she was and exactly what she was going to do. Let me tell you about Keth, because the where is the whole crucible of it. Keth was a fortress world. Not naturally, it had been made one, a planet of hard gray rock and thin cold air that the Alliance had fortified to hold a line, because Keth sat astride a route the Hadron needed, and so Keth had to be held, and our mixed unit was one of the pieces holding it. We were dug into a position called the shoulder, a high fortified ridge of bunkers and gun emplacements and deep tunnels carved into the living rock, overlooking a long valley the Hadron would have to come up if they wanted the route. It was a holding action, the worst kind of duty. You don't win a holding action. You only fail to lose it, day after day, until you're relieved or you're dead. And everyone dug into the shoulder understood which of those was more likely, because the Hadron were coming in force, and we were a mixed unit of maybe 300 at the end of a long supply line on a cold gray rock at the edge of a war. The Hadron. I should tell you what we were facing, because it matters for what she did. The Hadron were not like us and not like you. They were a swarm culture, a people who made war in vast coordinated masses, who did not value the individual life the way either Sorvan or human did, who came in numbers that broke the nerve before they broke the line. To hold against the Hadron, you needed 2 things. You needed a position that could channel their numbers, which the shoulder was. And you needed nerve, the will to keep standing when a tide of them came up the valley, because the Hadron won most of their battles before contact, won them in the moment when the defenders looked at the size of what was coming and broke. The Hadron were a weapon aimed at your courage. And courage on a cold rock at the end of a long line, in a unit that didn't trust its own commander, is a thin and precious thing. And I want to tell you how Captain Vale spent those 2 months, because at the time I read all of it as weakness, and every single thing I read as weakness was, I understand now, the most patient and deliberate act of command I have ever witnessed. She didn't assert herself. That was the first thing, the thing that confirmed all my contempt. A Sorvan commander taking over a resentful unit would have asserted dominance immediately, visibly, would have made an example, would have forced respect. That's how you do it. That's how command works. You establish that you are the strongest and the doubters fall in line. Vale did none of it. She arrived quiet, and she stayed quiet, and she let us go on calling her the placeholder, and she did not once in 2 months demand the respect her rank entitled her to. I thought she was too weak to take it. I thought she knew she couldn't win a dominance contest with a unit of proud Sorvan soldiers, and so she'd simply decline to have one, and I despised her for it, because to a Sorvan, a commander who won't fight for command isn't a commander at all. What she did instead, what I watched her do for 2 months and misread every single day, was learn us. She learned our names, all 300, Sorvan and human both, every soldier in the unit, their names and their families, and where they were from and what they were afraid of, and what they were good at. She walked the tunnels of the shoulder every day slowly, quietly, and she talked to people not commanding, just talking, learning, and I watched her do it, and I thought it was a soft human thing, a substitute for real authority, a child trying to be liked because she couldn't make herself feared. I'd see her sitting with the night watch in the cold, not inspecting, just sitting, asking a homesick young soldier about his world. I'd see her in the medical tunnel with the few wounded we had from the early skirmishes, knowing each one's name, each one's wound. I'd see her last in the mess line, always last every meal, and I read that as weakness too. A commander eats first. Among my people, a commander takes the best. That's what the rank is for, and Vale ate last every time after the lowest soldier in the unit had eaten. And I thought that's your placeholder. That's your soft human child who doesn't even understand what command entitles her to. There was one moment in those 2 months that I've turned over 10,000 times since, because it's the one where, if I'd had any wisdom at all, I'd have seen her. There was a Sorvan soldier in the unit named Dreven, older than me, a veteran of 3 campaigns, one of the proudest and most contemptuous of the placeholder, louder even than I was. And Dreven made a mistake. A real one on watch, the kind that on a fortress world holding a line can get people killed. He fell asleep at a sensor post, and a Hadron probe got further up the valley than it should have before the next post caught it, and it could have been a catastrophe, and by luck it wasn't. Among the Sorvan, this is a thing a commander destroys you for. Publicly. It's how you maintain the line. You make an example of the failure so the failure never happens again, and the harder the example, the better the commander. I watched, almost eager, to see what the placeholder would do, because surely now, faced with a real dereliction, she'd either have to assert herself at last or expose herself completely as unable to. She did neither. She took Dreven aside privately, no audience, which to a Sorvan already drains the act of its purpose, and I don't know everything that was said, but I know the shape of it because Dreven, of all people, told me, years later with his voice not steady. She didn't destroy him. She asked him why he'd fallen asleep, and the answer, it turned out, was that Dreven had been giving his own rest hours to cover for a younger soldier in his squad who was struggling, who couldn't have held the post alone, and Dreven had been carrying 2 watches worth of exhaustion to protect the boy and hadn't told anyone because among the Sorvan you don't admit that kind of softness. And Vale listened to all of it. And then she didn't praise him and she didn't punish him. She fixed it. She reorganized the watch rotation so the struggling boy was supported and Dreven wasn't carrying him alone. And she told Dreven, quietly, that protecting his people was the right instinct and exhausting himself in secret was the wrong method, and that next time he was to come to her, because carrying the unit was her job and she'd thank him to let her do it. I heard about this at the time, the bones of it, and I read it. I am telling you the truth of my own blindness. I read it as more weakness. A commander who wouldn't even punish a sleeping sentry. Soft. A placeholder who let discipline rot because she didn't have the spine to enforce it. That's what I saw. What had actually happened, what I was too proud to see, was that Vale had looked at a disciplinary failure and found underneath it an act of loyalty, and had honored the loyalty while correcting the method, and had in one private conversation turned one of her loudest doubters into a soldier who would, when the Hadron came, have died on her order without a half-second's hesitation. She didn't destroy Dreven to maintain the line. She understood that Dreven was the line and that you don't strengthen a line by breaking the people in it. I called it weakness. Dreven called it, years later, the moment he'd have followed her into anything. I understand now. I understand all of it now. She wasn't failing to command us. She was building the only kind of command that would hold when the Hadron came, not the Sorvan kind. The visible dominant kind that you follow because you can see the commander is strongest, but a different kind, a human kind, a thing I had no category for, where the soldiers follow you because they have come to understand slowly, in 100 small moments, that you know them, that you carry them, that you will eat last and stand last and take the blame first, that you are not above them but underneath them, holding them up. She spent 2 months making herself not the strongest thing in the unit but the most trusted thing in it. And I watched the whole thing and saw only a placeholder, because my 2,000 years of military pride had never taught me that trust was a form of command, or that the quietest person on the shoulder might be carrying all 300 of us on her small human back. I told you at the very start that by the day I found out I was the mistake, she'd already saved my life twice without my noticing. I should tell you about the first time, because it's the measure of how blind I was. There was an early skirmish, weeks before the real assault, a hadron probe in force, testing the shoulder, the kind of thing meant to find the weak point in a line. And I, in my pride when the probe came, did the Sorvan thing, the visible courage thing. I pushed forward out of my assigned position toward the fighting, because that's what a Sorvan officer does. You go to the front, you make your courage seen, and a position held too far back is a position a Sorvan is ashamed of. I left the place Vale had assigned me, and I went forward to fight where the fighting was, and I felt magnificent doing it. And I thought, even then, that I was showing the placeholder what a real soldier looked like. The position I'd left was a flanking emplacement, and it covered a tunnel mouth, and I had not understood, because I hadn't listened when Vale laid out the defense, because why would I listen to a placeholder, that the whole left side of the shoulder depended on that emplacement being held. When I abandoned it for the glory of the front, I opened a door. And the hadron probe, which was smarter than I'd credited, found the door almost at once and began to come through it, and the left flank started to come apart, and it would have rolled up the whole position, and I would have been the cause, the proud Sorvan officer who left his post for glory and lost the shoulder. It didn't happen, because Vale had seen me leave. She'd been watching the whole defense the way she watched everything, and she'd seen one of her officers abandon a key position for the front, and instead of calling me back, which would have taken time I'd already spent, time the hadron were already through, she had quietly moved her small human reserve, the handful of soldiers she'd held back exactly for this, into the gap I'd opened, and plugged the door I'd left open, and held the flank with her own held-back people, while I fought magnificently and uselessly at the front, taking the credit in my own mind for a courage that had nearly killed everyone. I didn't even know it had happened, that's the thing. I came back from the front flushed with my own valor, and the line had held, and I thought it had held because of soldiers like me, the brave forward ones, and I never knew, not for 2 months, not until after, that the flank I'd abandoned had been saved by the placeholder's quiet reserve, that the commander I despised had spent her soldiers to cover the gap my pride had torn, and had never once mentioned it to me, never used it against me, never made the example of me that a Sorvan commander would have made and would have been entitled to make. She just fixed it, quietly, the way she fixed everything, and let me keep my pride and waited. She saved my life and my honor both that day, and I called her a placeholder that same night in the mess loudly, and she was 3 tables away, and I know now that she heard me, and I know now that she said nothing and ate last and let me go on not knowing, because shaming me would have cost the unit a functioning officer, and she would rather carry my ignorance than break me with the truth. That is who she was. I just couldn't see it yet. None of us could. It took the 3rd month, and the tide coming up the valley to make us see. The hadron came in the 3rd month. And on the day they came, when the tide came up the valley and the line wavered and the nerves started to break, the thing the hadron aimed at, the courage, beginning to crack along the shoulder, I learned what Captain Imni Vale actually was, and what those 2 months of quiet had actually been building, and I learned it in the worst possible way, which was by watching the placeholder do the thing that none of the proud, strong, visible Sorvan commanders I'd ever served under would have known how to do. The thing that held the line when nothing else could have. That's where I have to stop this first time. Because the day the hadron came up the valley at the shoulder is the whole story, and I need you standing exactly here first. On a cold gray fortress world at the end of a long line, with a mixed unit of proud soldiers who'd spent 2 months despising the quiet human girl the army put over them, calling her the placeholder, certain we understood what command was, about to find out, every one of us, with a tide of the enemy coming up the valley, that we had never understood command at all, and that the smallest, quietest, most ignored person on the shoulder had been our commander in the truest sense the entire time. and we'd been too proud to see it until the battlefield made us. They came at dawn on the coldest morning of that cold world, and I will tell you the truth, which is that when I saw the size of it, I stopped being a proud Sorvan officer and became, for a few minutes, simply afraid. I'd faced the Hadron in skirmishes. I had not faced them in tide. There is a difference, and no briefing prepares you for it. The valley below the shoulder filled, from edge to edge, with them. Not soldiers the way I understood soldiers, but a single vast moving mass. The swarm coming up the valley in a number that the eye couldn't hold and the mind refused to total. And the sound of it came up ahead of it. A low grinding roar that you felt in the rock under your feet. And I understood in my body what every briefing had told my mind, which was that the Hadron's first weapon was not their numbers, but what their numbers did to you. The tide came up the valley, and I felt my courage go thin, felt it start to lift off me like heat, and I looked down the line of the shoulder, and I saw it happening to everyone. The Sorvan and the humans both, 300 soldiers looking at a thing too large to fight, and the line beginning before a single shot to waver. This is how the Hadron win. I know it now. They don't break the line with force. They break it with the sight of themselves in the minutes before contact, when a defender looks at the tide and does the math and concludes in the deepest animal part of him that holding his death and running is the only sense left. And once a few break, the rest follow, and the line that could have held dissolves into a rout, and the rout is where the dying happens. The Hadron were counting on it. They'd come up the valley in a mass designed to do exactly that, to crack 300 soldiers' nerve in the long, terrible minute before they were in range. And it was working. I felt it working in my own chest. And I want you to understand that in that minute I did not think, where is the commander? Because I had spent 2 months believing we didn't have one. And then Vale's voice came over the unit channel. It was not a battle speech. I'd heard Sorvan commanders give battle speeches, the great rousing roars meant to set the blood on fire, and a part of me, even then, even afraid, expected that a real commander would give one now and braced for the placeholder to fail at it. She didn't give one. Her voice came over the channel calm and quiet and completely steady, steadier than the rock, steadier than anything on that ridge. And she did not talk about glory or the enemy or holding the line. She said names. That's what she did. In the long, terrible minute before the tide reached us with 300 soldiers nerve cracking, Captain Imni Vale came over the channel and she started saying names. Our names. One after another around the whole position, each one with a word calm, certain, unhurried. Dreven, your emplacement is the strongest on the shoulder. I'm glad it's yours. Sella, watch your left. Tomic's got your right. He won't leave it. Cora, I know you're scared. You told me. That's all right. Scared is fine. Just stay where you are and do the next thing. On and on, around the line, every soldier by name. And I understood slowly what she was doing. And it was the most extraordinary act of command I have ever witnessed, and there was nothing visible or dominant about it at all. She was reaching into each of us, by name, in the minute the Hadron were trying to dissolve us, and she was reminding every single soldier on that ridge that they were not a faceless thing in a faceless line about to be erased by a faceless tide, that they were Dreven, were Sella, were Cora, were known, were held, were part of something that knew their name and was counting on them specifically. The Hadron's whole weapon was to turn us into a panicking mass, an anonymous crumbling thing, the mirror of their own swarm. And Vale's answer, the only answer that could have worked, the answer she'd spent 2 months building the capacity to give, was to refuse to let us become a mass, to hold each of us, by name, as a person, in the exact minute the enemy was trying to drown the person in the crowd. She had learned 300 names over 2 months, and I had called it weakness. And now I understood she'd been loading the only weapon that could win this, one name at a time, and she fired it down the line in the last minute before contact, and I felt the line stop wavering. I felt my own nerve come back when she said my name. I won't pretend it didn't. She said my name and a word, something only she could have known, something from one of those conversations I'd held myself too proud to value, and the heat that had been lifting off my courage settled back down, because the placeholder, the soft human child, knew my name and my fear and was telling me calmly in the worst minute of my life that she was counting on me. And I held. We all held. The tide reached the shoulder and broke against a line that had not broken first, because the commander I despised had reached into 300 cracking soldiers and reminded every one of them who they were. The fighting I won't give you. It was a holding action, and it was as bad as a holding action gets, and we held through that first dawn assault, because the line didn't break in the minute it was meant to. But the Hadron were not finished, and they were not stupid, and what they did next is where the real test came, and where I learned the last and deepest thing about what Vale was. They found the gap. By the second day, after the first assault failed, the Hadron had probed the shoulder enough to find what every position has: the weak point, the seam, in our case a low saddle on the right flank where the rock dipped and the emplacements couldn't fully cover. And on the third dawn they came at it in force, all of them. The whole tide concentrated on the one place the shoulder couldn't hold. And the right flank began to go. Not from lost nerve this time, from simple weight, from a tide of the enemy pouring into the one gap the position couldn't close, and the soldiers there, good soldiers fighting well, were being overwhelmed by sheer number. And the gap was widening, and I watched from my own position, and I understood with a cold certainty that the shoulder was about to fall, that the right flank would break and the Hadron would pour through and roll up the line, and we would all die on this cold gray rock. And there was nothing anyone could do, because you cannot hold a gap that the whole tide has chosen. You can only feed soldiers into it until they're gone. That's when Vale went to the gap herself. I saw her go. The commander, who by every doctrine I'd been raised in should have been at the command post, directing, preserving herself as the mind of the unit, left the post on foot, and went down the line toward the breaking flank, toward the worst of it, toward the one place on the shoulder where death was most certain. And I thought, in my last contemptuous half-thought before everything changed, there, the placeholder's going to die uselessly, a soft human gesture, throwing herself into a gap she can't fill. I was wrong about that too. I was wrong about it in the deepest way, because Vale did not go to the gap to fight. She went to the gap to do the thing that only she, of everyone on that ridge, had built the standing to do. And what that was, and what it cost, and how a small human woman who never raised her voice held the right flank of the shoulder when weight and number and doctrine all said it could not be held, is the thing I have spent the rest of my life trying to be worthy of having witnessed. That's where I have to stop. Because what happened at the gap is the whole of it. The moment the battlefield finally revealed our commander to the proud blind soldiers who'd called her a placeholder for 2 months, the moment I understood, too late to ever take back the word, exactly what we'd had and exactly what we'd failed to see, and I need you standing exactly here first. On the third dawn, on a breaking flank, with the tide pouring through the gap and the shoulder about to fall, watching a small quiet human woman walk toward the worst place on the cold gray world, not to fight, but to do the one thing her 2 months of being underestimated had secretly prepared her, and only her, to do. She didn't pick up a weapon. That's the thing I have to make you believe, because it's the truth and it's the part nobody wants, because we all want the placeholder to seize a gun and become a warrior and prove the doubters wrong in the way doubters expect to be proven wrong. She didn't. Vale reached the breaking flank with no weapon raised, and what she did when she got there was the single most powerful act of command I have witnessed in a long life of war, and it was not an act of force at all. She started carrying the wounded. The right flank was going because it was overwhelmed, too few soldiers holding too wide a gap against too much weight, and the thing that was breaking it, underneath the simple math, was the same thing the Hadron always used. The soldiers in that gap could feel themselves being abandoned to die. That's how a flank actually breaks, not all at once. It breaks when each soldier in it looks left and right and concludes that they've been written off, that the command has already counted them as lost, that they're being fed into a hole to buy time for everyone else. And the moment a soldier believes they've been abandoned, they stop holding, because no one holds a position they've been left to die in. The Hadron's weight was opening the gap. But it was the belief in abandonment that was going to collapse it. And Vale walked into the worst of that gap, unarmed in the open, where the fire was heaviest and the dying was happening, and she began to pull the wounded out. By hand, the commander on her knees in the gap, dragging hurt soldiers back from the edge one at a time, calm, unhurried, exactly the way she'd done everything for 2 months, and she was talking the whole time, the names again, the calm, certain voice, but now her body was saying the thing the voice couldn't. You are not abandoned. Look. The commander is here, in the worst place, with you, getting the hurt ones out, last to leave, and she will not write you off, because if she'd written you off she would not be here on her knees in the fire pulling your wounded to safety. That's what held the flank, not firepower, not a heroic stand. The simple, total, unanswerable fact of the commander's body in the worst place, refusing to leave, refusing to count anyone as lost, and the soldiers in that gap, seeing her there, seeing that they had not been abandoned, that the placeholder had come to the dying place to be with them, and carry their wounded, found the one thing the Hadron could not take from them, which was the will to hold a position they now knew they were not alone in. The flank stopped breaking. Not because the weight lessened, the weight was the same, but because the belief that breaks a flank had been answered, in person on her knees, by a small human woman who would not leave. And the unit moved to her. That's the part that still undoes me, because once Vale was in the gap, once 300 soldiers understood that their commander was in the worst place on the shoulder pulling out the wounded, something happened that no order could have produced. Soldiers came to her. From all down the line, wherever they could be spared, they came toward the gap, not because she ordered it, she never ordered it, she was too busy carrying the hurt, but because you cannot watch your commander kneel in the fire for your wounded and stay where it's safe. The whole unit's center of gravity shifted toward the breaking flank, toward her, drawn by the same thing that had held the gap, and the flank that should have collapsed instead thickened, reinforced not by command, but by the simple human impossibility of leaving her there alone. The Hadron had aimed their whole weight at the one place the shoulder couldn't hold, and they'd hit the one place the commander had chosen to stand, and it turned out that the place the commander stands is the place that does not fall, when the commander is the kind of commander Vale was. We held the shoulder. 3 dawns of the Hadron tied, and we held, and on the 4th day the relief column finally broke through the long supply line, and the assault lifted, and the shoulder was still ours, 300 soldiers minus the ones we'd lost, still holding the line on the cold gray rock, because the placeholder had refused to be the kind of commander I'd spent 2 months wishing she was. She was hurt. I should tell you that because it's the cost, and a story that hides its cost is a lie. Vale took a wound in the gap. She was unarmed in the worst of the fire for a long time, carrying the wounded, and the fire does not care that you're unarmed, and she nearly died of it, and she spent a long time afterward in the medical tunnels she'd walked every day learning everyone's name, and the soldiers she'd learned came to sit with her, in shifts, around the clock, because she taught us, without ever meaning to teach us, that you sit with your wounded and you know their names and you do not leave them alone. We'd learned it from watching her. We gave it back to her. She lived. I made sure in the years after to know that she lived, that she healed, that she went on to command larger things and command them the same quiet way, the way that doesn't announce itself, the way you only understand after the battlefield reveals it. I went to her in the medical tunnel before the relief column took us off Keth. I had to. I'd called her a placeholder for 2 months loudly to her face once, and she'd saved my life twice and my honor once and held the line that kept 300 of us alive, and I had to say the thing, even though there's no word in the Sorvan tongue clean enough for it. I knelt by her, the way she'd knelt for the wounded, and I tried to say I was sorry, that I'd been wrong, that I'd never understood what she was, that my whole proud culture's idea of command had been a child's idea next to hers. And she stopped me. She was weak, hurt, but she stopped me, and she said the thing I've carried ever since, the thing that's the whole truth of her. She said, "You weren't wrong about what you saw. You were wrong about what it meant. You saw a commander who ate last and learned names and wouldn't assert herself, and you called it weakness. It is weakness by your people's measure. That's the secret. I led you with the things your culture throws away. The eating last, the knowing names, the standing in the gap. Your people have a word for all of it, and the word is weak, and you're right, it is. It's the weak things, and the weak things are what held the shoulder." She was very tired. Strength holds a line until the line gets too heavy. Then only the weak things hold it. Then only the commander who'll kneel in the gap. Remember that. You'll command someday. Lead them with the weak things. They're the only things strong enough. I have led since. Many soldiers many years through worse than Keth. And I have led them with the weak things. Every time eating last, learning names, standing in the gap. And they have followed me through places that strength alone could never have held. And every one of those soldiers is alive or died with dignity because of a small human woman I once called a placeholder, who taught me, on a cold gray rock, that everything my proud old culture knew about command was the easy half of it, and that the hard half, the half that holds when the line gets too heavy, is the half we'd thrown away. People tell this story now, my people, and they tell it the way you'd expect. They ignored the girl in uniform until the battlefield revealed their commander, and they expect the reveal to be that she was secretly fierce, secretly deadly, a warrior under the soft surface who showed us all up. And every time I correct them, and every time they're disappointed, because the truth is harder and quieter than the tale they want. The battlefield revealed our commander. That part's right. It revealed that command was never the strong thing we'd worshipped for 2,000 years. It was the quiet thing, the kneeling thing, the eating last, learning names, standing in the gap, refusing to leave thing. The thing we'd called weak, and ignored, and dismissed as a placeholder, right up until the line got too heavy for strength to hold, and a small human woman walked unarmed into the worst place on the world and held it with the only thing that ever could. They ignored the girl in uniform. We all did, I most of all. Until the battlefield revealed that she'd been the only real commander any of us had ever served under, and that we'd been too proud, for 2,000 years, to know what a commander was. I know now. She taught me on her knees in the gap last to leave. That's command. Everything else is just being strong until the weight comes.